Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to continue our net lease series and talk about single versus multi-tenant deals. So this is an important one because there's certain investors that'll only buy one or the other. Some are only single tenant, some are multi-tenant, so we'll dive in. My name's Hayden Hulsey. I'm a broker here with Results Commercial in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So let's go through the pros and the cons. The pros of a single tenant net lease, sometimes you'll see STNL. So single tenant, a lot of times you get really long lease terms, which are nice. You can get into 10, 15, 20-year initial terms. So that's great. Multi-tenant is sometimes a little bit different, which we'll touch on. With single tenant buildings, you also have very strong tenants. Now you can in a multi-tenant as well, but you can get into the, Starbucks, Chick-fil-A's, Arby's, McDonald's, Wendy's. You get a single tenant and they're a really strong tenant in that building. The third piece to add here is that many tenants also want a single tenant building. So you'll hear about trends like Starbucks or Apple, for example. They don't want to share a building with another tenant. They want their own single tenant structure. Now for the landlord, this is great because that's another positive, meaning that they don't have to deal with multiple tenants. It's easier management. It's also can be easier to release. So let's say that tenant goes away, you have a single tenant building, it can be a lot easier to go find a new tenant when there's a single clean structure. Now, with the absolute triple net lease as well, that's really important because you can put all of those expenses on a tenant. That means that the landlord is not covering anything. And an absolute triple net, the tenant pays for base rent, CAM, tax, insurance, all of the structure, the roof, the parking lot, you name it, it's on them. All right, so now let's touch on the pros of the multi-tenant building. Now, one of the most obvious ones would be when you have multiple tenants, you're spreading out your risk. A single tenant, if that one tenant leaves, that's a big downside, which we're going to talk about. Multi-tenant, you have multiple different tenants, therefore you can spread it out. You might have a little bit more vacancy, but at least you have some income coming in. So the second piece with a multi-tenant building is that you usually can have some better returns. On a single tenant, you can get into a lot more of just a single cap. Your return is what it is. It's pretty fixed. A multi-tenant, you have a little bit more value add potential. So you can change around some common areas, you can make things look a lot nicer, you can go rework different spaces to create different configurations, and therefore you can actually, increase some of those values and actually get that cap up. So, you might buy something for, a little bit lower, you put some money, some, blood, sweat, and tears into it and actually get that return up. And then the final piece with a management style here with multi-tenant is that you're going to be more hands-on. Now for some people that could be a pro or a con, but there are people like myself, I like to actually be involved. I like to do something with the property. So when you have a multi-tenant, it gives you the ability to do a little bit more versus single tenant. It is what it is, that rent is on time usually. It's just, it's very cut and dry versus multi-tenant, you have different opportunities. So that covers some of the pros. So now let's talk about what the cons would be. And I referenced a couple of them, but on a single tenant, I would say probably the biggest con would be if that one tenant goes away, your income went away. Your mortgage didn't stop, your taxes don't stop, your insurance doesn't stop. You still have to go pay those bills. Now, the releasing of that too is going to require usually build-out dollars, so tenant improvement allowance, leasing commissions, all the above, so it can start to get pretty expensive. The other con of a single tenant net lease deal is that lenders in different cases can also require more money down, so it can actually cost more. Now this completely depends on the borrower, but if you get into a single tenant deal, a lender can look at that and say, well, there's only one stream of income. If that income goes away, you still need to cover debt service. Therefore, you need to put a little bit more money down. So that's going to be the flip side. Now, it always, of course, depends on who the tenant is because, an Arby's is going to be different than a mom and pop in a single tenant like a, say a cell phone repair company. So now let's talk about the cons of a multi-tenant building. One of the biggest ones here is going to be the lease type. You can't get into the absolute triple net leases like you can in a single tenant deal. Now there's certain cases where you probably can, but most all of the time, there's going to be a level of CAM involved to where a landlord is going to be responsible for common areas, taking care of things like the roof, the foundation, the actual structure, sometimes HVAC units, depending on how the lease is written, to where there's going to be more out-of-pocket expenses. Now, I told you the return can fluctuate a bit, but at least, the landlord is going to be much more involved than with a single tenant build. So the last couple pieces would be, lower quality tenants in general. Now that doesn't mean that you can't get into a large multi-tenant building where you have a great grocery anchor tenant with Kowalski's and multiple different nationals in there, Noodles and Company, you name it. The generalization though is going to be when you get into those neighborhood strip center multi-tenant net lease deals, you're not going to have as strong of tenants, which can mean, of course, you could have more turnover, which can lead to more fees with leasing, with vacancy, build out, all the above. So with a single tenant, you can at least, get into a 15, 20-year deal with a really high quality AAA national tenant, and that's gonna carry you through versus a multi-tenant. So those are a couple pros and cons of each. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.